In a dusty courtyard 4,000 years ago, a farmer drags a sack of barley toward the city gate. He's not here to trade it for sandals. He's here to turn it into something more powerful than grain. Because inside that city, behind thick walls and heavier rules, barley can become wages, rent, interest, and debt. Not as coins, as numbers, as marks pressed into clay, as a promise you can't easily escape. Before coins existed, the first money system that actually worked wasn't a pile of metal. It was an accounting machine, built out of weights, ledgers, and authority. And once you see how that machine ran, you'll understand something uncomfortable about money. Money doesn't begin as an object. It begins as an agreement, enforced by institutions strong enough to make the agreement real. By the end of this story, you'll understand exactly how the first durable money system solved the problem of trust, why it spread across entire regions, and why coins, when they finally arrived, were less of an invention than a convenience. But to understand that, we have to drop the story most people were taught. The story goes like this. First, there was barter. People swapped goats for grain, grain for tools, tools for cloth. Barter was messy, inefficient, and slow. Then someone invented money and civilization took off. It's a neat story. It's also not how the first money systems actually worked. Because the earliest complex economies didn't run on random swaps between strangers. They ran on obligations, on who owed what to whom, on who had delivered and who hadn't, on seasons and harvests, on rations and taxes, on labor owed to a temple, a palace, or a landowner. In that world, the central problem wasn't, how do we trade? The problem was, how do we keep score, at scale, over time? And that's where the first real money system begins. Not in a marketplace, but in administration. In cities where thousands of people depended on coordinated farming, storage, irrigation, and distribution. Where authority had to collect, allocate, and punish. Where you needed a common language for value, even if the value never appeared as a physical thing. Here's the mechanism, and it's simpler than it sounds. The first working money system had 3 pillars: a unit of account, a record of obligations, and enforcement. That's it. If you can measure value in a standard way, write down who owes what, and enforce settlement, your economy can run without coins. The unit of account is the measuring stick. It's the one that makes everything comparable. It doesn't have to be a coin. It can be a weight of grain, a weight of metal, or a standardized bundle. What matters is that everyone agrees on the unit, because someone powerful makes them agree. Then comes the ledger, a way to store memory outside the human brain. Because trust breaks when memory breaks. And in early cities, memory was not enough. You needed a system that could track rations, wages, taxes, rents, loans, and penalties across months and years. Finally, enforcement. If nobody can compel payment, a ledger is just a diary. So the first money systems don't emerge in places with no power. They emerge where power concentrates: temples, palaces, courts. The institutions that could set standards, certify measures, and punish defaulters. That's the engine. And now the rehook, the part most people miss. Once money becomes a ledger system, paying doesn't require handing over anything at the moment of exchange. Paying can be a transfer of obligation. A change in who owes who, a line in clay, a seal pressed into wet mud, a receipt that says, "This is owed, this is delivered, this is settled." It's money without coins, and it scales far better than barter ever could. Imagine a large temple complex at the center of a city. People deliver grain after harvest. The grain is stored, measured, and recorded. Workers receive rations, also measured and recorded. Craftsmen are paid for producing goods, recorded. Farmers pay rent on land, recorded. Merchants owe duties, recorded. Somebody is always owing somebody else. And the institution in the middle, temple or palace, becomes the clearinghouse. Not because it's morally pure, because it controls storage, measurement, and force. This is where the unit of account becomes the heartbeat. When the system uses a standard unit, like a fixed weight of barley or a weight of silver, The economy can price everything in the same language: bread, oil, wool, labor days, animals, different goods. One accounting unit. That does two things immediately. First, it makes planning possible. Second, it makes extraction possible. Because once you can measure value, you can tax it. You can set rents. You can charge interest. You can impose fines. And you can do it consistently across thousands of people without renegotiating the meaning of value every time. But a standard unit only works if measurement is trusted. So early economies obsess over weights and measures, standard stones, standard containers, standard ways to count and mark. This is not boring bureaucracy, this is the skeleton of money, because a unit of account without standardized measurement is a lie waiting to happen. Now comes the second pillar, the record. In early systems, the record wasn't paper, it was clay. A small tablet pressed with symbols, then dried and stored, and the tablet didn't represent money as a thing. It represented a relationship, a claim, a debt, a delivery, a promise scheduled in the future. When a merchant took an advance, it could be recorded as a quantity owed. When a worker received rations, it could be recorded as a quantity delivered. When a farmer borrowed seed grain before planting, it could be recorded as a future obligation after harvest. And once it's recorded, it becomes enforceable, because the institution holding the records becomes the arbiter of truth. It's not just that everyone knows you owe. The tablet knows, and the tablet sits in a room guarded by the people who run the city. Here's the next rehook. This system creates money out of time, because the real innovation isn't the unit or the tablet. It's the ability to bind a future harvest to a present obligation, to convert uncertainty into something tradable, to say, not today, but later. And that changes everything. It allows large projects, canals, walls, storage facilities, because labor can be promised and settled over time. It allows trade at distance, because merchants can carry claims rather than hauling heavy goods. It allows specialization, because workers can rely on ration systems and wages. It also allows something darker, debt traps, because when money is a ledger, debt can grow even when nothing new is produced. If interest exists, a bad harvest can become permanent bondage. And the earlier the system, the more brutal the enforcement can be, because legal protections are thin and survival is non-negotiable. So how did this first money system actually work in daily life? It worked because most people didn't need coins to do most transactions. In small communities, obligations could be social. In cities, obligations could be institutional. If you worked on a public project, you received rations. If you produced goods for the temple storehouse, you received an allocation. If you were a farmer, you owed a portion of your crop as rent or tax. If you were a merchant, you could receive advances and settle later. The payments were structured flows, not hand-to-hand cash. And crucially, the unit of account could be different from what people physically used. That sounds abstract, but it's a modern idea too. You can price something in dollars even if you pay with a card. The unit is the measure. The payment method is just settlement. In early systems, the measure might be grain or a weight of metal, even if settlement happened with actual goods. And this is why the first effective money system isn't a coin at all. It's an economy where value is measured, recorded, and enforced, so people can coordinate beyond the limits of personal trust. Now, take a step back and notice what this system solves. Barter fails at scale because it demands coincidence. You must want what I have at the exact moment I want what you have. A ledger system doesn't require coincidence. It requires credibility. And credibility comes from institution. If you trust the temple's measures, you accept its records. If you fear the palace's enforcement, you honor the obligations. If you need access to storage, protection, or land rights, you participate. That's the trade. Participation for stability. Obligation for access. And for many people, it's not optional. Now the next pivot, the moment this system reveals its true power. Once obligations are recorded, they can be transferred. A claim on grain can be reassigned. A debt can be sold or inherited. An obligation can be used to settle another obligation. In other words, the ledger can become a network. And networks create liquidity without coins. You don't need a pile of metal to create money-like movement. You need a reliable way to move claims. That is the first money system that actually worked. Not because it was fair, because it was operational. But there's a catch. The system depends on stable administration, stable storage, stable enforcement, stable standards. And stability is rare. So the first money systems develop stress fractures early. Drought, war, floods, bad harvests, political coups. When the harvest fails, the unit of account doesn't fail. It becomes more dangerous. Because debts are still written down, rents are still due, interest still accumulates. And now the economy reveals a brutal truth. Accounting is indifferent to suffering. So societies face a choice. Enforce debts strictly and risk collapse through unrest, flight, or rebellion. Or reset obligations and risk undermining the credibility of the system. This is where we see something that feels surprisingly modern. Debt relief, amnesties, cancellations. Not as charity, but as governance. Because if too many people fall into permanent debt, you don't get a stable tax base. You get a hollowed-out society, a system that can't feed itself. And the authority at the center, temple or palace, often prefers a system that keeps production going over a system that perfectly enforces every contract. That's not morality. That's statecraft. And here comes the rehook. This means the first working money system is inseparable from politics. Money isn't neutral. It's a tool used to organize labor, extract surplus, and maintain order. When the system works, it looks like economy. When it breaks, it reveals itself as power. So if this system worked, why did anyone bother inventing coins? Because the ledger system, for all its power, has a weakness. It works best inside a trusted administrative domain, inside the city, inside the territory, inside the reach of the institution that keeps the ledger. But the world doesn't stop at the city gate. Trade expands. Caravans travel further. Goods move across cultural and political boundaries. And outside your home institution, your clay tablet is just clay. A claim only matters if the other side trusts the institution behind it. And that trust doesn't automatically cross borders. So as long-distance exchange grows, people need a settlement medium that is easier to verify without shared administration. Something you can carry. Something you can test, weigh, and accept without knowing the entire story behind it. In other words, portability and verifiability. Coins will eventually solve that. But notice what coins are doing in that moment. They aren't replacing the unit of account. They are standardizing settlement. They are making a claim portable. They are turning trust in an institution into trust in a stamped object, still backed, in practice, by authority. That's the turning point. The ledger came first. The coin comes later as a tool for expanding settlement beyond the core. But even then, coins don't erase the ledger. They join it, because a coin on its own is just metal. It becomes money because it fits inside a system of prices, taxes, fines, and legal enforcement. Even in coin economies, the state sets the unit, the courts enforce contracts, the tax office demands payment, and the ledgers never disappear. They just evolve, from clay to paper, from paper to databases. Now pull the camera back even further, and you'll see the consequences of the first system. Once money becomes a unit of account plus enforcement, it creates a new kind of economy, one that can coordinate thousands of people who don't personally trust one another. It allows cities to grow. It allows specialization. It allows long projects. It allows standing institutions. It also makes societies vulnerable to new kinds of crises, debt spirals, administrative corruption, measurement fraud, and the constant tension between strict enforcement and political survival. And it changes the psychology of value. Because when value is a number, people begin to see the world in accounts, not just in goods, not just in relationships, but in balances. And balances can be positive or negative. Credit and debt become moral categories. not because they are moral, because they are recorded, visible, counted. And once counted, they can be used to rank people, control people, and bind futures. Here's the big idea that ties it all together. The first money system that actually worked wasn't an invention designed to make trade easier. It was a governance technology designed to make large societies manageable. Money started as measurement, memory, and enforcement, a way to convert messy human obligations into standardized units that institutions could administer. Coins are not the birth of money. They are one chapter in the story of how money becomes portable. But the core mechanism, unit of account, record, enforcement, remains the same across millennia. Even now. Your modern paycheck is a ledger entry. Your bank balance is a record. Your taxes are enforced. And the money you think you hold is mostly not paper or metal at all. It is the system agreeing that you have a claim, and the system being strong enough to make that claim meaningful. So when people ask, what is money really? The oldest answer is also the most honest. Money is the scoreboard of obligations, backed by power. And once that scoreboard exists, it can build empires, fund wars, create prosperity, and produce collapse, without changing its basic logic. In the next episode, we follow the moment that logic becomes stamped into metal. Not as a magical breakthrough, but as a practical solution to a growing problem. Because when trade begins to outrun administration, societies reach for something new. A portable promise. A piece of authority you can carry in your hand. The first coins don't replace the system, they reveal what it always was.